Good morning and welcome to Rising. Last night, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine. Not long after Putin's address, explosions were recorded on the outskirts of several Ukrainian cities, as well as in their capital, Kiev. Here you can see Russian helicopters attacking the airport near Kiev. President Biden issued a statement saying that Putin has chosen a, quote, premeditated war that will bring catastrophic loss of life and human suffering, adding that the U.S. and its allies will respond in a united and decisive way. NATO will convene an emergency summit tomorrow and is deploying additional defensive land and air forces to its eastern flank in response to the Russian moves. Senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, joins us to discuss. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel.
Thanks for having me.
And so what is the latest that you're hearing about the situation on the ground?
Well, it seems pretty clear that this is an absolutely across the country bombardment. We've seen literally from the west to the east and the north to the south throughout Ukraine, attacks on critical infrastructure of radar sites, command and control sites, AAA anti-aircraft situations, so that they can knock out the ability to knock out Ukraine's ability to interdict Russian air, whether that's missiles, air-powered drones, etc. And that seems to have been very successfully done. And now that I think that probably the next things we're going to start hearing is lots of mechanized troops and armor coming across. And actually, we've already seen some of that. And I think this is only going to get worse. But it really does seem this is a full-on war.
Yeah. So this is an invasion. The Russians are going into the country with the goal of, well, I mean, what do you think is the goal? Is it possible the goal is anything other than, conquering Ukraine, taking control of Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure how far they want to go on it, but look, we have to acknowledge some things here. First of all, that all the bloodshed here is 100% on the shoulders of Vladimir Putin and nobody else. This does not have to happen. But with that saying, he has been signaling for 15 years that NATO advancement to his border through Ukraine is a red line. And he has shown twice in 2008 and 2014 that he is willing to use force to limit it. As recently as December, Putin again said, hey, y'all aren't listening to me. I am deadly serious about this red line on Ukraine. And then he signaled again with this massive buildup of forces, which we just seem to want to ignore. We don't like it. We don't want to be told we can't do anything. What we should have done, and what even still is still possible in this now aftermath, is that we should have said, hey, Ukraine's never coming in NATO. This is not something that the alliance needs. They'll never qualify. So why should we say that this door is open when all that's going to do is get Ukraine sucked into a war? Because Putin was very clear on that. We made certain that everybody understood that they're not coming in NATO because every NATO nation has said we're not going to fight Russia on your behalf. Now, if you're not going to fight them, then why not do the one thing that might have precluded war and say the door is closed so that we take off the table Putin's red line, and then this may not have happened at all. But it did. And now that we've left the Ukrainians on their own, they're fighting this on their own. Nobody's coming to their aid. And so I think that they need to now take this bull by the horns and say, hey, we're going to have to make some hard choices here. And that is, if you declare neutrality right now, if you say we're not going to join NATO anymore, that's going to be a humiliating situation, but it could stop the war. If they, on the other hand, continue to say we're going to be brave, we're going to fight to the end, then all you're going to do is get lots of Ukrainians killed because they cannot stand up to this Russian military armada. They just can't do it. And that's the ugly place that we're in right now.
And I want to underline your point and get your sense on what we were thinking over the years. But to add to the context that you're talking about here. So in the wake of the Soviet Union, you have Ukraine and these other countries, on the western end of Russia. They split off and form their own countries. We end up supporting these kind of pro-democracy movements that end up overthrowing a bunch of kind of Russian-backed leaders. We then start expanding NATO, which was built to counter the Soviet Union. We start expanding NATO eastward. We add Lithuania on the border of Russia. We add Estonia on the border of Russia. We then add Georgia on the border of Russia, or we're about to add Georgia on the border, and Russia says, no, this is a red line. We told you don't add Georgia into NATO, and so they invade Georgia. And we follow that up then by supporting another pro-democracy movement in Ukraine, toppling a Russian-backed regime, and then trying to pull Ukraine into the NATO orbit. Russia follows that up with an invasion of Crimea immediately afterwards. We continue to try to pull Ukraine further and further. Was there anybody in Washington who said, why don't we just leave Ukraine alone and leave Ukraine as a sovereign country and a buffer state between Europe and Russia? Why was there so much push by the blob after everything that, as you said, as clear as Putin made it, invading Russia in 2008, invading Crimea in 2014, saying that this is a red line for me. If you keep doing this, we will take military action, and backing it up by twice doing that. Was there anybody in Washington saying, how about we just take him at his word and stop messing with Ukraine and just leave it as a sovereign buffer country between these two? Was anybody making that argument?
You know, there wasn't very many. I mean, the defense priorities, my organization has been, which is one of the reasons I joined them, because they were one of the very consistent voices calling for this. But unfortunately, part of the problem, actually a major part of this problem, is that we came out of the Cold War and we, were very braggadocious about having won the Cold War, and now that it's a unipolar moment, et cetera. And so from basically 1992 forward, we said, hey, we don't have to listen to Russia. We don't have to listen to anything they say. We'll do whatever we want to do, and we're going to expand NATO. And of course, they complained, time after time, Putin, all the way back to 2007 in that famous Munich Security Conference, where he first laid down the first marker, and we just continue to ignore them. Now, even as of the 2004, when they brought the Baltics, which did border Russia, into the alliance, these were still too weak to do anything. But they set about to make their military much better. They reformed it, they reorganized it, and they modernized it so that by 2008, they at least had enough to go into limited incursion into Georgia. And today, they are a very, very formidable conventional force, and we can no longer just tell them whatever we want to do. We now have to treat them as a major regional power. And look, this is not something we haven't done before. I mean, look at 1956. The Soviet Union invaded into Hungary, just like this, with tanks and everything. We didn't like it, but we made sure it didn't escalate beyond that. And we didn't go into with military power. We didn't threaten them further. And they stopped right there because they were worried about their internal security of the Soviet Union. Something like that still can happen here, as long as we acknowledge reality that we no longer can just dictate to Russia what we want them to do. But that doesn't mean that our security is weakened, because we still have power. Right. We still have 30 nations that have an Article 5 guarantee. Ukraine's not one of them, and Putin is not going to satisfy until he has that buffer.
And on one hand, there is some realistic thinking, because I'm not hearing from people in the administration or really anyone advocating, maybe outside of a few crazy voices, that we're going to send troops and mount some military defense of Ukraine. That does not sound to me like it was really on the table. So given that was not on the table, you would think it would be easy and obvious to do exactly what you suggested. If we are not going to send troops, it would be another matter if we were. If we decided, yeah, we're going to actually have like World War III, if it comes to that, over Ukraine. But no one in the administration is saying that they were willing to do that. Given that, why wouldn't they just do what you said and say, nope, Ukraine is not joining not joining NATO. They don't meet the criteria. They're not, a fully formed democracy. They're too corrupt, etc. We're not going to defend them, and then we don't need to have this confrontation. But it's like that was what they were thinking, but they were just not saying it out loud.
That's exactly right. That's one of the things we've been just impassionately arguing. I believe I even done it a few times on your show here. And that is, look, you made clear that that Ukraine's not coming into NATO. You know that you're not going to give Article 5 guarantees to somebody on Russia's border, because it threatens the entire rest of the bloc of having to go to war if they don't need to. Why would you not then just say, all right, let's just acknowledge reality, and then just say that? Just say that the door's closed. Say, we want you to be independent. We want you to be neutral. So they don't have to like lose their freedom at all. They just had to be neutral. But instead of doing that, we just kept this frankly arrogant position that no one's going to tell us we can close the door. And as the result of that is, now then you have Ukrainians dying, and if they continue to fight, they're going to die in even larger numbers because they just can't stand up to it. And we could have precluded that by just taking it off the table, but we wouldn't do it. Now that we're trying to say, oh boy, we're going to have this unified front, we stand for the territorial integrity, but we're not going to do anything to help them gain it, because that would possibly mean World War III or a nuclear strike against our side, and we're not going to do that. So we just need to, even in this late hour after the invasion started, we need to eat some crow or more Ukrainians are going to die.
And a couple of weeks ago, one of the lead U.S. negotiators, Wendy Sherman, said in an interview with NPR, she said, if Russia invades, there will be a counterinsurgency, like there will be a guerrilla war. And she said it in a way and with a certainty that suggested that she knew who was going to be financing and arming this insurgency that Russia would be facing, if it does, expand its occupation of the de facto territory into even deeper territory. Is that your sense? Is that what we're going to do? Is that what the United States is going to do next? Just fund an insurgency?
I'm sure plenty of people are going to want to do that. But look, let me just emphatically say right now to anybody who may be listening in the government, there are no free options here. There are no cost options here. Anything you do, Russia's already thought this through. I mean, probably many months ago, if not a year ago, they've decided what they're going to do. So they know that that's a distinct possibility. And there is no way that they're just going to allow us to do that and have no cost imposed on us. Don't forget, there are several hundred, almost 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria near where Russian troops are. Now, do you think that they're going to leave us alone when we're funding people in an insurgency to kill Russian troops? There's no way that they're going to do that. They're famous for tit for tat kind of responses. All these sanctions that we say they're going to have crippling sanctions. Those cut both ways, and they have their own tools to play, which can harm us. So instead of acknowledging the reality and get this off the table, now that we want to make it even worse, which is going to harm our own interest. And that's where I'm telling you, we've got to draw the line, get rid of this arrogance, and just say, hey, we're going to eat pride for now so we don't make it worse.
Yeah. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, we really appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And we'll have more Rising just right after this. Stay with us.